Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The following morning, Isabelle sat at her small kitchen table, sipping her coffee, her fingers trembling slightly around the mug. The events of the previous night seemed surreal, like a dream she wasn't sure she was ready to wake up from. She had agreed to the contract with William Grey marriage. On paper at least, and she still couldn't shake the unease settling in her chest. What had she done? Was she really prepared to go through with this? The thought of pretending to be his wife, even if it was just a business arrangement, seemed harder now than it had the night before. She stared at the contract lying on the table in front of her, the words still fresh in her mind. No love, no emotions, just a business deal. It seemed simple enough, but Isabelle wasn't so sure. Could she keep her heart out of this? Could she live up to his expectations? By late afternoon, Isabelle was standing in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her blouse. She wasn't used to wearing anything this formal. William had arranged for her to visit his office later that day, to finalize the paperwork and begin their marriage for the public eye. The thought of walking into his world, a world so far removed from her own, made her stomach turn. She glanced at herself one more time, fixing her hair, trying to appear confident. After all, she had no choice but to go through with this. Her family needed her, and this was the only way to help them. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, and left her apartment. As she arrived at Grey Enterprises, Isabelle felt small standing in the shadow of the towering skyscraper. She had been here once before, but only for a quick meeting, and now she was walking in as his wife, even though they both knew it was a lie. The lobby was sleek and pristine, the polished floors reflecting the cold, artificial light that filled the space. She couldn't help but feel out of place. But this was it. This was her chance to fix everything. She walked up to the receptionist, who smiled at her warmly. "I'm here to see Mr. Grey," Isabelle said, her voice sounding shakier than she had intended. The receptionist nodded and handed her a visitor's pass. "Right this way, Mrs. Grey." Her words stung a little more than Isabelle had expected. She forced herself to smile, nodding, and followed the receptionist to the elevator. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped into the lavish penthouse office. It was grand. Everything about it screamed power and wealth. A large desk sat at the center of the room, with walls lined with shelves of books and awards. William Grey stood by the window, staring out over the city, looking every bit the CEO he was. His back was to her, but as she entered the room, he turned to face her. "Isabelle," he said, his voice calm and controlled, his usual air of confidence in place. "Welcome." Isabelle's heart raced, her mind struggling to process the surreal nature of the situation. She was standing in a room that belonged to a man she barely knew, yet was now bound to for a year, in a marriage that wasn't even real. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. William nodded and motioned for her to take a seat across from him at his desk. "I trust you're ready to get started. We'll finalize the paperwork today and make this official. After that, we can start preparing for the upcoming charity gala, where we'll make our first public appearance as a couple." Isabelle nodded, trying to keep her composure. This wasn't her world, this world of high society, power, and status, but she had to fit in. She had no choice. As the meeting went on, she signed the papers, her hand shaking slightly as she wrote her name next to his. She was doing this for her family, for her future, and yet every moment felt heavier than the last. Was she making the right decision? When the paperwork was complete, William stood, offering his hand to her. Isabelle hesitated for just a moment before shaking his hand, the touch surprisingly warm. She felt a flicker of something stir inside her, but she quickly brushed it away. "Good," William said, his tone businesslike, but there was a glimmer of something she couldn't quite place. "I'll have my assistant arrange everything for the gala. I'm sure you'll be great at handling everything." "You'll do just fine." Isabelle forced a smile. "Thank you. I'll do my best." She didn't know what she was expecting, but it wasn't this. She thought she'd feel a sense of relief, but instead, she felt more uncertain than ever. As she left his office, she couldn't shake the feeling that this would be much harder than she had imagined. What had she gotten herself into? As she stepped into the elevator to head back down, she caught her reflection in the shiny glass walls. For a moment, she didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. She wasn't the same person who had walked into this building earlier. She had signed away her freedom, her heart, and her future to a man who was nothing like the world she came from. But the decision had been made. She had to trust that this was the only way to move forward. And with that, Isabelle took a deep breath and stepped out of the elevator, ready or at least pretending to be Riodido, face the world that awaited her. As she walked out of the building, she couldn't help but wonder, was she making the right choice? Could she truly keep her heart out of this arranged marriage? Only time would tell. Days passed, and Isabelle found herself settling into the strange rhythm of her new life. It was not the life she had imagined, but it was the one she was living now. Her first public appearance with William was just around the corner at a charity gala that would mark their first official appearance as a couple. The thought of walking into a room full of people, pretending to be married to a man she barely knew, made her stomach turn. But this was what she had agreed to, and there was no turning back. Isabelle stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the gown that had been picked out for her, a deep emerald dress that fit perfectly, but felt foreign. It was a world away from the modest clothes she was used to wearing. She barely recognized herself. The woman who looked back at her was polished, confident, poised, but inside, she was still the same Isabelle. Still unsure, still scared. As she ran a hand through her hair, she thought about the time they had spent together since the contract was signed. William was as distant as ever, keeping his emotions locked behind the cold exterior of the so everyone knew him to be. There had been no conversation beyond the business, no moments of warmth or understanding. She hadn't expected love, but a part of her had hoped for more, at least a genuine connection. Isabelle shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. She couldn't afford to overthink this. Her father's medical bills, the mounting debts, the uncertainty of her future, all of it depended on this arrangement. She had made a decision, and now she had to see it through. The car ride to the gala was long, and Isabelle spent it in silence, her hands nervously twisting the strap of her purse. William sat across from her, his eyes focused on his phone. The quiet between them was thick, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. When they arrived at the gala, the sight of the red carpet, the flashing cameras, and the glamorous crowd made Isabelle's heart race. She had never been part of this world. She was a small-town girl, used to the quiet comfort of her family's home, not the glitz and glamour of a high-society event. William stepped out of the car first, adjusting his suit with a practiced ease. Isabelle hesitated before following him, taking a deep breath before stepping into the spotlight. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, but she focused on one thing: William. He was her anchor, the reason she was here. As they walked down the red carpet, their hands brushed together. The connection was brief, but for a split second, Isabelle felt something stir inside her. Was it just the excitement of the moment? Or was it something more? She quickly shook the thought away. There was no place for feelings in this arrangement. Inside the venue, the lights were blinding, and the chatter of the crowd filled the air. Isabelle stood beside William, feeling like an outsider in a world she didn't belong. People smiled at them, congratulating them on their marriage. William was every bit the charming, collected CEO, but Isabelle couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing a part in a game she didn't fully understand. "You look stunning," William said, his voice low, but there was no warmth in his words. It was just another compliment, another way to keep up appearances. Isabelle smiled back, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady. You look great too. They mingled with other guests, exchanging pleasantries with high-profile business leaders, philanthropists, and influencers. Isabelle felt out of place, but she kept her composure, nodding and smiling when needed. She had learned quickly that this world was about appearances, about making people believe in the facade you built. As the evening wore on, Isabelle found herself alone for a moment, standing by a large window that overlooked the city skyline. She gazed out at the lights, her mind wandering. The world below seemed so distant, so far removed from the life she had known. Was this what success felt like? The wealth, the power, it all seemed hollow when she thought about it. She wanted more. But what more could she ask for? She had everything she had ever wanted for her family. She had made the right choice, hadn't she? Isabelle. William's voice snapped her out of her thoughts, and she turned to find him standing behind her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something different in his eyes tonight. A quiet intensity. We need to leave. It's time. She nodded and followed him back to the car, the silence between them heavier than ever. The night had been a blur of bright lights and fake smiles, but it had also been a reminder of what she had agreed to. This was her life now. This was her reality. And for better or for worse, it would stay that way. As they drove back, Isabelle couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. Was it just the tension of a night? Or was it something deeper? Was William starting to see her as more than just a contract? More than just a business arrangement? Or was she reading too much into things? As the car pulled up to her apartment, Isabelle stepped out, looking back at William. Thank you for tonight, she said softly. William nodded, but his gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than usual. There was something unspoken between them, something that had shifted during the course of the evening, but neither of them was ready to confront it. Good night, Isabelle, he said quietly, before stepping into the car and driving away, leaving Isabelle standing in the quiet of the night, wondering if the walls between them were beginning to crack, or if this was just another moment that would fade with time. Days passed, and Isabelle found herself settling into the strange routine of being married to William Grey, if only on paper. The distance between them seemed to grow with each passing day. She had expected the lack of emotional connection, but she hadn't anticipated how hollow it would feel. Every time they met, it was business as usual, no smiles, no warmth. Just a man with a deal and a woman who had signed up for it, without question. It was a life she never imagined, and yet here she was, bound to him by a contract she could not escape. The gala, despite the initial nerves, had passed without incident. William had been the picture of charm and sophistication, while Isabelle played the part of his wife, smiling politely, but always feeling like she was hiding behind a mask. And it wasn't just that night, every time they were together. It was the same, this cold, professional distance. Isabelle began to wonder, would it always be like this? Was this truly all there was to her life now? She had gone through the motions over the past week, attending meetings with William, signing papers, and making small talk with his colleagues at his request. Every time he spoke to her, his voice was firm, controlled, never once letting her see a hint of anything beyond the business side of their arrangement. The rare moments of silence between them felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. They were living together, but they weren't really living at all. It was as if they were both going through the motions, but not truly experiencing life. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and events, Isabelle found herself in the small apartment she still called home. She had been up late, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the numbers in front of her, figures that would determine whether or not her family would survive the coming months. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her chest as she took a deep breath, trying to quiet the turmoil inside. She thought about the life she could have had, the life she had dreamed of before everything had changed. She had always imagined herself with someone who cared about her, someone who saw her as more than just a financial solution or a business partner. But with William, there was no room for that. She had made her choice. She had to remind herself of that. This was about survival, about doing what was necessary to keep her family afloat. Still, the longing for something real tugged at her heart. The phone on the table buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from William. Meet me in the office. We need to finalize the charity project. There's a gala next month, and I want to make sure everything is ready. It's important. Isabelle glanced at the clock. It was late, but she couldn't afford to say no. She had a role to play, a job to do, and she would do it. She grabbed her coat and headed out, determined to put aside the personal doubts and focus on the task at hand. When she arrived at the office, William was already there, waiting for her. His expression was serious, but there was something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before, a flicker of something. "I need you to take the lead on this," William said as she walked in. "You'll be overseeing the event. I trust you can handle it. The guests will expect a flawless presentation, and I'm counting on you." Isabelle was taken aback. She had never expected him to entrust her with something so important, something that went beyond the scope of their initial arrangement. There was a brief moment of hesitation, but she quickly nodded. "Of course, I'll handle it." She had no idea why he trusted her, but she wasn't about to question it. She had to prove herself, if only to herself. As the night wore on, they went over the details of the event. William was businesslike, as usual, but something felt different. There was a subtle shift, a change in the air between them. When the meeting ended, Isabelle stood up to leave, but before she could turn away, William spoke again, his voice softer this time. "Isabelle," he said, catching her attention, "I'm glad we're doing this together. You're doing great." For a split second, she caught a glimpse of something more in his eyes, something almost human. It was fleeting, but it made her pause. Was this just another form of politeness, or was there more to his words than she realized? She nodded, her heart racing slightly, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you, William." With that, she turned and walked out of his office, her mind swirling with questions. What was he thinking? Was he starting to see her as more than just a contract? Or was this just another performance in a life they were both pretending to live? As she stepped into the cool night air, Isabelle took a deep breath. She had to stay focused. She had a role to play, and she couldn't afford to get lost in thoughts of what could be. Her family needed her. She had to do this for them. But as she walked down the empty street, a small part of her couldn't help but wonder, was it really possible to keep her heart out of it? Could she really separate the business from the personal? Or was she beginning to fall for the very man she had promised to keep her distance from? Days passed, and Isabelle's life began to settle into an uncomfortable routine. The contract with William Grey had been signed, and now they were both playing their parts, him, the aloof CEO, and her, the dutiful wife, in the eyes of the public. She had expected the emotional distance, but she didn't realize just how cold it would feel, especially when she found herself beginning to care more than she should. Each day, she tried to remind herself that this was just business, that she wasn't supposed to feel anything. But the longer she was in his world, the harder it became to separate her emotions from the role she was playing. Isabelle sat at her desk, reviewing the plans for the upcoming charity gala. It was a huge event, and William had asked her to take the lead. At first, she had been surprised that he trusted her with something so important, but now it felt like a lifeline. It gave her something to focus on, something that kept her mind occupied instead of wandering to places she wasn't sure she wanted to go. The phone on her desk buzzed, and she saw William's name on the screen. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. It was just business. She cleared her throat and answered. "Isabelle." William's voice was steady as usual. "How are the plans for the gala coming along? We need everything to be flawless. The guest list is finalized, and I want to make sure we impress everyone." Isabelle felt the pressure of his expectations, but she didn't let it show. "Everything is on track, William. I've finalized the schedule, and we've confirmed the venue. It will be perfect." She paused for a moment, then added, "I'll handle it. You don't need to worry." There was a brief silence before William spoke again. "I know you will." He sounded calm, but there was something in his voice, something that made Isabelle wonder if there was more he wasn't saying. After the call ended, Isabelle leaned back in her chair, letting out a long breath. It was strange. The cold professionalism between them had started to feel more natural. She had learned to live with it, even though a part of her still longed for something more. But how could she ask for that when the foundation of their relationship was built on a contract, not feelings? The day of the gala arrived faster than she expected. Isabelle stood in front of her full-length mirror, adjusting the elegant black dress William had chosen for her. It wasn't like anything she'd ever worn before. The dress was sleek, sophisticated, and a perfect fit. She almost didn't recognize herself. Her reflection seemed to belong to a woman she hadn't quite become. A woman in a world of power and wealth she didn't feel like she belonged in. As she finished her makeup and took one last look at herself, she could feel the butterflies in her stomach. The charity gala wasn't just any event, it was the night they would present themselves as the perfect couple, William's perfect wife. And no matter how much Isabelle tried to tell herself it was just another night of playing a role, a part of her couldn't deny that she was nervous. When she arrived at the venue, the grandeur of the ballroom took her breath away. The chandeliers sparkled above, and the room was filled with the hum of conversation, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Isabelle felt small in comparison to the elegance around her. She wasn't used to this world, these people, these expectations. But she had to play her part. For her family. For the future. William stood at the entrance, looking every bit the confident CEO he was. When he saw Isabelle, his expression softened slightly, though it was hard to read. She smiled and walked toward him, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. "You look beautiful," William said, his voice low. He stepped closer, adjusting the strap on her dress that had slipped slightly. Isabelle smiled, her heart skipping a beat at his words. "Thank you. You look amazing too." She hadn't expected him to be so attentive, and yet he was. Was it just for show? Or was there something more? They mingled with the guests, exchanging pleasantries and nodding at familiar faces. Isabelle did her best to keep up with the conversations, but she couldn't shake the feeling that all eyes were on them. On her. She had never been the center of attention like this before. She felt exposed, even though she was standing next to a man who commanded attention effortlessly. At one point during the evening, as they stood at the bar, a guest asked William about their recent vacation to Paris. Isabelle didn't know how to respond. It wasn't a vacation, they hadn't even been to Paris. It was just another fabricated detail of their life for the public eye. But she smiled and nodded, pretending along with him. William caught her eye, sensing her discomfort, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You're doing great," he said, his voice softer now. Isabelle nodded, but the words stung. She wasn't sure if he was talking about the gala or their whole arrangement. As the night went on, Isabelle couldn't ignore the way William's gaze lingered on her, the way he made sure she was taken care of, even in the crowd. It was as if, for the first time, he saw her as more than just his wife for the night. It confused her. Was this just part of his role, or was he starting to see her differently? By the end of the evening, Isabelle was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. As they left the venue, the cool night air hit her face, and for a moment, she felt a sense of relief. The world outside, this fabricated reality, felt more real. She glanced at William, who was standing beside her, still composed, still guarded. "We did it," Isabelle said quietly, almost to herself. It went well. She didn't expect him to respond, but to her surprise, he did. "Yes, we did," William replied, his tone more relaxed than she had ever heard it. For a moment, she caught a glimpse of something more in his eyes, something human. As they drove back to her apartment, the silence between them was comfortable for the first time. Isabelle wasn't sure if it was the calm after the storm of the evening, or if something had truly changed between them. Either way, she couldn't deny that she was starting to feel something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. As she stepped out of the car and into the quiet night, she paused for a moment, glancing back at William. "Good night," she said softly. "Good night, Isabelle," William replied, his voice low. And as she turned and walked inside, Isabelle couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of something more? Or was it all just another act in the game they were playing? The following week, Isabelle found herself caught in a whirlwind of events, more meetings, more gala preparations, more moments of pretending. But something had changed in her. Every time she saw William, there was an unspoken tension between them, a charge that neither of them acknowledged, but both felt. the lines between business and something more blurred with each passing day. Isabelle tried to ignore it, telling herself that this was still just a business arrangement. But deep down, she couldn't deny the growing attraction she felt toward him. Every glance, every subtle touch seemed to mean something more than it should. William had become less distant, more engaged in their meetings. He'd started asking her opinion on things, valuing her thoughts in a way that surprised her. At first, she thought it was just because he was trying to play his part as the perfect husband, but the more time they spent together, the more she realized that there was something else. Was he beginning to see her as more than just a business partner? Or was she imagining things? One evening, after another late-night session of planning, William stood at the door of her office, his posture casual, but his gaze intense. "You've been working hard," he said, his voice unexpectedly soft. "Take a break. You've earned it." Isabelle looked up from the paper she had been staring at for the last hour, surprised by his sudden kindness. "I'm fine," Isabelle replied, trying to keep her composure. There's still so much to do before the gala. She didn't want to admit that she was feeling overwhelmed. She didn't want to seem weak. But William stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I know you're doing your best," William said, his voice low, "but you need to take care of yourself, too." He paused for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "You can't keep running on empty, Isabelle. You deserve more than this." The words struck a chord deep inside her, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. There was something so genuine in his voice, something that didn't match the cold CEO she had come to know. Isabelle felt a knot form in her stomach. "I'm just doing what needs to be done," she said, her voice faltering slightly. "I have to keep going for my family, for my future." William nodded, but there was a hint of something more in his eyes, something softer, more understanding. "You don't have to do it alone," he said, his words catching her off guard. He stepped closer, the distance between them growing smaller. Isabelle looked up at him, unsure of what to say. Her heart was racing, and for a moment, she could feel the weight of his presence in a way she hadn't before. The air between them seemed to shift, the tension palpable. William looked at her, his expression unreadable. Isabelle opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. She felt lost in the moment, unsure of where to go next. She had always kept her emotions in check, but now, standing here with him, it was becoming harder to do so. "I never asked for any of this," Isabelle said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't expect any of this to happen. But here we are." She glanced down at her hands, suddenly feeling exposed. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel, William. This isn't what I wanted." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for some kind of answer. William stood silently for a moment, as if contemplating her words. Then, finally he spoke. "I never asked for this either," he said, his voice steady. "But sometimes, life gives us things we don't expect. And you've been more than I could have ever asked for." Isabelle stared at him, her mind racing. What did that mean? Was he just being polite? Or was there something more in his words? Before she could respond, William reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. The touch was soft, reassuring, and for a brief moment, Isabelle forgot about the world outside. She felt safe in a way she hadn't in a long time. Was this the beginning of something real? Or was she reading too much into it? Isabelle took a step back, breaking the moment. "I need to go. There's still so much to do," she said, her voice shaky. She couldn't stay here, caught in the tension between them. She needed to keep her distance, to remind herself that this was just a business arrangement. Nothing more. William nodded, stepping back. "Of course," he said, his tone returning to its usual professional edge. "I'll see you tomorrow." Isabelle turned and walked out of the room, her heart still racing. She didn't know what was happening between them, but she knew one thing for sure: things were starting to change. She just didn't know if she was ready for that change yet. As she walked down the hall, Isabelle couldn't help but wonder, was this the moment things started to shift? Was she starting to feel something real for William? Or was this just a passing moment, a brief lapse in the emotional walls she had carefully built around herself? Only time would tell. Days passed, and Isabelle continued to navigate the delicate balance of pretending. The contract with William Grey had started to feel more like a cage than a solution. She had become accustomed to the routine, but the emotional distance between them felt more suffocating with each passing day. There was no escaping it. The growing connection she felt toward William was undeniable, but she couldn't afford to acknowledge it. After all, their relationship was just a business arrangement. She had to remind herself of that. But despite her best efforts to keep her emotions in check, the cracks in her resolve began to show. William had continued to be distant, but something about the way he had spoken to her the other night, something in his voice kept echoing in her mind. It was clear that he had begun to trust her more, maybe even value her. He had been more attentive in meetings, asked for her input, and the rare moments when they were alone together felt different. Not like a contract, not like a business transaction. There was something there, and it scared her. One evening, after another exhausting day of event planning, Isabelle sat on her couch, trying to focus on the task at hand. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, and she looked up to see William's name. Hesitating for a moment, she picked it up. "Isabelle." William's voice came through the phone, sounding as composed as always, but there was an undercurrent of something else. "I need to talk to you about the gala. Can you meet me at the office tonight?" Isabelle's heart skipped a beat. She knew it was just business, but there was a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. "I'll be there," she replied, trying to keep her tone even. She arrived at the office just as the sun was setting, the orange glow of the city's skyline casting a soft light through the windows. William was already there, standing by the large window that overlooked the city, his silhouette framed by the fading light. He turned when he heard the door open, his expression neutral as always, but there was something different in the way he looked at her this time. "I need you to help me with something important," William said, his voice steady but with a hint of urgency. Isabelle nodded, trying to push her growing anxiety aside. "Of course," she said, walking toward him. "What do you need?" She had no idea what he wanted, but she was ready to do whatever was necessary. After all, this was part of the deal. William paused for a moment before answering, as if choosing his words carefully. "There's been some pressure from the board about the gala. They're expecting us to announce something big. I need you to be ready to support me, to stand by me in front of them." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, Isabelle saw a flicker of vulnerability in his gaze. Isabelle felt a twinge of sympathy. She had never seen him this uncertain. "You don't have to do this alone," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I'm here. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together." It was a simple statement, but the words felt true, more true than anything she had said in a long time. William's eyes softened, and for a split second, Isabelle felt a wave of connection pass between them. But before either of them could say anything else, the phone on his desk buzzed. He glanced at it and sighed, clearly irritated. "How about I take this?" he said, picking up the phone. "We'll talk later." Isabelle nodded and turned to leave, but before she reached the door, William called out to her. "Isabelle," he said, his voice gentle, almost too soft. "Thank you." The words hung in the air, and Isabelle's heart skipped another beat. She hadn't expected that, hadn't expected him to thank her. It felt like an unexpected shift, as if for the first time, he saw her not as just an employee or a wife in name, but as someone real, someone who mattered. She nodded, forcing a smile, though her chest tightened. "Of course," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll always be here." And with that, she left the office, her mind racing. She didn't know what had just happened, but the shift between them was undeniable. She could feel the weight of it. As she stepped out into the night, Isabelle felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her: confusion, excitement, and fear. The walls she had built around herself were starting to crumble, piece by piece. She had promised herself she wouldn't let anything get in the way of her goals. But what if the person she was becoming wasn't the person she had planned to be? And as she walked through the empty streets, her thoughts kept returning to one question: was this just the beginning of something more? Or was it a fleeting moment that would fade with time? Isabelle arrived at the office the next day with a new sense of resolve. The events from the night before had left her questioning everything: her role in this marriage, her feelings for William, and whether or not she could keep going with this facade. But as she sat at her desk, sorting through the endless paperwork and event details for the upcoming gala, she reminded herself of one simple truth: this was a business arrangement, and that's all it would ever be. She couldn't afford to let her emotions get in the way. Not now. Not when everything was so close to falling apart. William was more distant than usual that day, a change that didn't go unnoticed. His usual cool, collected demeanor had slipped slightly, and Isabelle wondered if the tension between them had something to do with the night before. She tried not to overthink it, but it was impossible to ignore the shift in the air whenever they were in the same room. The glances, the unspoken wordsit was all too much. For the first time, she realized how much she had begun to rely on his approval, and how much she longed for his acknowledgement. Later that afternoon, as the day's meetings ended, William walked into her office. Isabelle was still at her desk, going over the final details for the gala, trying to ignore the growing unease inside her. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Isabelle, I need to speak with you about something important," he said, his voice softer than usual. She looked up from her work, meeting his gaze. There was a seriousness in his eyes that made her heart race. Was it about the gala? About their arrangement? "Of course," she replied, setting the papers aside and standing up. "What's going on?" William hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "The gala is getting closer, and I'm feeling the pressure," he said. "I need to make sure everything goes perfectly. The board is expecting a big announcement, and we have to deliver. You've been incredible, Isabelle. I'm counting on you." There was something in his words, something that caught Isabelle off guard. She had grown used to William's business-like tone, but now there was a hint of trust in his voice, a hint of vulnerability. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't just the woman in the contract. She was someone he needed, someone he relied on. "You don't need to worry," she said, trying to keep her composure. "I've got everything under control. We'll make sure the gala is everything you want it to be." William looked at her for a long moment, his gaze intense. Then, without another word, he stepped closer. Isabelle felt the space between them shrink, and before she could stop herself, her breath caught in her throat. He was standing too close, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. "Isabelle, William began, but then his phone rang, cutting him off. He sighed and pulled it from his pocket, glancing at the screen. "I need to take this, but we'll talk later. Thank you for everything you're doing." He turned and walked out of the office, leaving Isabelle standing there, her heart pounding in her chest. Isabelle took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions inside her. What was happening between them? Was it just the pressure of the upcoming gala, or was there something more? She couldn't tell anymore. She had tried so hard to keep her distance, to remind herself that this was just business. But it was getting harder to ignore the way her heart raced every time he looked at her, every time he spoke to her, with that strange softness in his voice. As the evening approached, Isabelle left the office, her mind still racing. The city was quieter now, the streets lit by streetlights and the occasional passing car. She felt the weight of everything pressing down on her family, the contract, the growing feelings for William that she could no longer ignore. When she got home, she stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. The world felt so far away from the life she had once known. She had come so far, and yet it felt like she was losing control. She had to remind herself of why she was doing this to save her family. But in the quiet of her apartment, the truth was clear: she wasn't just doing this for them anymore. She was doing this for herself. And maybe, just maybe, she was doing this for him too. As the night wore on, Isabelle felt the weight of her decision, the pull between duty and desire. She didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending, and she didn't know if she was ready for what came next. Isabelle sat at her kitchen table, staring at the contract in front of her. It had been months since she had signed it, but now, more than ever, she wondered if she had made the right choice. Her life had changed so much since then. She had walked into William Grey's world, a world of wealth and power, and had started to lose herself in it. She tried to keep her emotions in check, to remind herself that this was just a business deal, but with each passing day, the line between business and something real seemed blurrier. The gala had come and gone, and everything had gone off without a hitch. The board had been impressed, the event a success, and yet, in the quiet after all the applause, Isabelle couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between her and William. It wasn't just the contract anymore. The moments they shared, the glances, the subtle touches, they all felt different. She wasn't sure if it was him or if it was her, but the distance between them was closing, and that terrified her. As the days passed, their interactions became more personal, but still, the wall between them remained. William's cold, composed exterior was still there, but Isabelle had begun to see cracks in it. He was still the CEO, still the man who held all the power, but there was a vulnerability to him that she hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just about the contract anymore. They had shared something beyond business, something deeper. One evening, after another long day, Isabelle found herself sitting in her apartment, scrolling through the pictures from the gala. She saw a picture of William looking at her, his expression soft, almost tender. It had been captured in a moment of calm amidst the chaos of the night. It was a look she had never seen from him before, a look that made her question everything. Was he starting to see her as more than just a contract? Or was this all just part of the performance? The doorbell rang, pulling Isabelle out of her thoughts. She walked to the door and opened it to find William standing there. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the air between them was thick with unspoken words. William looked different tonight, no suit, no business facade, just him. And Isabelle couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Isabelle nodded, stepping aside to let him in. She didn't know what was coming, but a part of her knew this conversation was inevitable. They sat down on the couch, the silence between them almost deafening. "I've been thinking about everything," William began, his voice hesitant. "About the contract, about us." He looked at Isabelle, his gaze intense. "I realized something. I don't want this to be just a contract anymore. I want more than that. I want us to be real." Isabelle's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had never expected him to say this. She stared at him, unsure of what to say. Was this it? Was he finally admitting what she had feared all along, that their feelings had become real? "I don't know what to say," she whispered. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had promised herself she wouldn't get emotionally involved, but now, standing here with him, it was clear that she had already broken that promise. William reached for her hand, his touch warm against her skin. "I know this was never part of the plan, but I can't ignore how I feel. And I don't want to pretend anymore. I care about you, Isabelle." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Isabelle's heart race. For the first time in months, Isabelle let herself believe in the possibility of something more. She had spent so long trying to keep her emotions in check, but now, in this moment, she realized that she couldn't hide from what was happening between them. Maybe this wasn't just about the contract after all. Maybe it was about something real. She squeezed his hand, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I care about you too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the truth, and for the first time, it felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. They sat in silence for a moment, their hands still intertwined, both of them processing the shift in their relationship. Isabelle had no idea what the future would look like, but for the first time, she felt hopeful. The contract that had started as a way to protect her family had turned into something more, something that had the potential to change everything. As William leaned in, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, Isabelle knew that their lives were about to take a new turn. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about them, about what they could become together. And as they sat there, the future uncertain but full of possibility, Isabelle couldn't help but smile. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something beautiful.